Thanks for listening to the AZ Wildcats podcast brought to you by DraftKings. Great deal going on. Put in your deposit and you get $100 or up to $1,000 in possible free plays. Got to be a new customer. With Brad Allis, I'm Mike Luke. I really apologize. I got caught in a line and I couldn't get out. So here we are. We're here to get started. Lots of comments on here, so we'll get to those. But Brad, since we last talked, the Pac-12 basically lost the two teams that matter. What are your thoughts?
You know, it's a surprise, and it's not. You knew the landscape was going to have to change. I honestly thought we were going to see that alliance between the Pac-12, the Big 12, and the ACC kind of form a super conference. I understand the Big Ten's desire to add USC and UCLA. If that is all they end up doing, I'm a little surprised that's it. To me, you should probably go for a full Western expansion. But it sounds like Arizona's administration is being proactive instead of reactive, and that's what you have to do right now. I made my prediction. I think Arizona and the mountain schools will join the Big 12 at some point in the next week or two, and then negotiations will begin to absorb the Pac-12, and whether that's just Washington and Oregon, whether that's the entire Pac-12 merger. But I think if you're Arizona, you've got to secure yourself first. And if you're the Big 12, you take those four schools in a heartbeat, because then you're in a position of power to negotiate either with the Pac-12 or the ACC, as there are going to be some teams, I think, looking to jump ship from the ACC, which sounds ridiculous in some regards because it is, the number one basketball conference, the ESPN darling. But this is all about football. That's what college sports is right now. It's all about football. And, if, as good of a brand as Duke basketball and North Carolina basketball are, as weird as it sounds, Oklahoma State football is a more valuable commodity overall.
Now, when I first heard the news, the one thing I don't understand, again, and we've talked about this throughout the week, if you're the Pac-12 commissioner, and again, I get that you're new, how does this blindside you? Because this was already done, Brad. You had when this was leaked on Twitter, everything was done. And so it wasn't like it was just a couple people in here. You had probably a couple dozen people that were in on this. How does that happen?
Apparently, it was just super well orchestrated. Apparently, the two ADs from USC and UCLA didn't even speak to each other until about 48 hours before the announcement was made. I don't know how it happened. While I would like to be able to blame the commissioner, no one else knew about it either. So the Big Ten went full Cold War espionage, meeting on bridges, and I don't know how they did it, but they did it. And yeah, it's much like, the Texas-Oklahoma thing. The Big 12 basically bent over backwards to accommodate those two schools, especially Texas, and they got screwed. The Pac-12 for years has bent over backwards to accommodate USC mostly and UCLA secondarily, and got screwed. And I think, again, when the smoke clears, the big loser in this is the Pac-8, 10, 12 history.
And I don't believe, and we're going to get to a lot of your guys' comments here in just a second. Again, I do apologize for getting on here late. That definitely was my fault. But the one thing that I will say is that Arizona right now, the Pac-12 as it is, it can't sustain, Brad. You saw the report from John Canzano where the TV rights deals went from $500 million to $300 million just with the loss of two teams right there. And so when you're looking at revenue, you're talking about $50 million per school going or something like that, going down to $30 million. That's a drastically different thing when you're looking at budgets, when you're looking at how everything is set up.
Yeah, I think the only way the Pac-12 survives as a Power 5 conference is you have to poach the Big 12. You have to strategically add the Mountain West, and again, form some kind of alliance with the ACC. Because if you look at it, the Pac-12 was already number 5, at least in football and basketball. And you lose, and people forget UCLA has not been very good at football for a while, but most people don't realize that.
Right.
You know, you ask most people like, oh yeah, UCLA, they probably finish second every year. So that is something to consider, but it's the LA market. And while the LA market for college sports is not huge, it's a pro town, but
Right.
all big cities are pro towns.
Right.
You know, ASU, while Arizona is almost as important for the Phoenix market as ASU is if you look at eyes on the product, especially streaming. And that's something we're going to have to, whether it's today or in the future, streaming is a huge factor in this. And that might be the only way the Pac-12 survives, if they can figure out by getting those brainiacs at Cal and Stanford and Cronkite and U of A and Washington. I mean, there's some smart people there to figure out the streaming aspect and whether that's Apple or Amazon. But that's what I think the Big 12 is probably doing. My guess is, reading the tea leaves, I think CBS is behind suddenly the Big 12 because CBS needs content.
Right.
Because Fox is Big 10, SEC is ESPN. If CBS wants to stay in the college sports world, and they absolutely should, they, and maybe along with whether it's, you know, what do they have, Paramount Plus, or whether it's, you know, through Amazon or Apple, need content because live content is the hardest thing to get right now. And that's where all the advertising is. That's one reason you're seeing pro wrestling getting bid on huge because it's live content. You know, for all the spoilers that comes out over a Stranger Things, the spoilers in sports is, you know, and award shows and concerts. So I think the digital landscape is very important. And that's a feather in Arizona's cap is, and I don't know what the current numbers are, but I know the first couple years of the Pac-12 network, the most viewed audience was Arizona basketball fans, men's basketball. There were more viewers in Phoenix for Arizona sports than there were for ASU. So Arizona fans tune into Arizona sports, at least digitally, while they don't have the football. And at the end of the day, it's all about football. But Arizona basketball fans are loyal and watch the product. Arizona women's basketball fans watch the product. Softball fans watch the product. Now, those numbers may be minuscule, but if you're trying to create a Big 12 network as part of Paramount Plus or part of Amazon or Apple or Peacock, those numbers do start to add up, and Arizona provides, that's something they provide beyond being, what is it, the 68th largest television market.
Are we overrating the impact of ASU right here? And here's what I mean by that. You keep hearing about the Phoenix market. I don't really know. Does ASU athletics, and again, I guess this is a question I'm just throwing out there, but does ASU athletics resonate in the Valley, Brad, to where it's a prominent force given the amount of the population it's there, or is it just because it's a big city?
I think they're very similar to UCLA.
Yeah.
And frankly, USC minus football. It does resonate. I think if you're looking at the Phoenix market and reading some of these national columns, it sounds like they lump Arizona into the Phoenix market. Right. Much like Oregon is the Portland market. Because I keep seeing people, well, Oregon's a small market. No, it's Portland. I mean, Portland's not a huge market. You know, just like I think as much as Salt Lake City is an important market, you have half that market right now with BYU. Right. But yes, I think that's the saving grace for ASU, frankly, for a lot of this, is they have the 8th largest or the 11th largest TV market in the 6th largest city. Because right now, ASU athletics, you know, football's down, basketball's a non-factor. And while the secondary sports are pretty good with a great history and track record, right now, Arizona women's basketball is better than ASU women's basketball, especially with the retirement. Arizona baseball is better than ASU baseball. Now, that's going to be cyclical. And softball are 50-50. Right. So, yeah, but I think, again, when you control the Phoenix market, yes. Now, if for some reason the Big Ten goes crazy in their expansion, they would pick Arizona over ASU because of the academics, the AAU stuff. That's not happening now, maybe in the future. But I think right now Arizona and ASU are joined at the hip because it gives you that Phoenix market, and that's an important market. If you look at the Big 12, they just added their second largest market when they added Houston. Right. And they have Dallas, but in essence, they're losing Dallas because of Texas. Again, TCU is a drop. But they have the potential to add 3 top I think it's 3 top 35 markets in Phoenix, Salt Lake City, and Denver. And then, then if you add Oregon and Seattle, you add 2 more top 30 type markets. And the thing I wouldn't count out either, San Diego State. Right. Then you're in Southern California, and that helps with recruiting in the Big 12.
Brad, have I ever told you about the DraftKings Sportsbook app, code word PHNX?
You've mentioned it once or twice.
All right, so here's the deal, because you're probably wondering, where's Mike going with this? All right, football's over, basketball's over, no UFC, but the best thing that you can do right now is get in there, and if you bet on anything, you put down your down payment, you can get $1,000, up to $1,000 free bet. 21 and up, Arizona only. Got a gambling problem, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP. Is there wrestling coming up, Brad, that you would bet on?
Over the weekend, we had Money in the Bank from WWE, but next month you got SummerSlam, and they do cool things on DraftKings. They do it's almost like gambling on the Oscars. You can pick like how many pinfall. So you're not betting on the wins and losses, but you can who's going to have the first pinfall, who's going to have the longest introduction, things like that. So there's some fun stuff you can play on there, and take advantage of those free plays.
All right. So again, 21 and up, Arizona, only new customers. All right. When I want Arizona to move on to the Big 12, mainly because I think the Pac-12 has done its not its charter members, but a lot of its members wrong here, Brad. And I'll give you the example here. How cool would it be to see Arizona in a home and home going into Fog Allen Fieldhouse once per year? Because here's where the difference lies, in my opinion. That game would be highlighted on ESPN, probably on a Tuesday at 5 o'clock, something like that, as opposed to being buried on the Pac-12 network at 9 o'clock with a guy who, and again, I'm okay with Bill Walton, but who's more interested in talking about things that aren't even on the court right there. That to me is just the simple things that major conferences get that I just don't think the Pac-12 ever got.
Again, let's assume it's CBS, and I keep going with CBS.
Right.
What if you're the noon Saturday game on CBS, which that game was in 2003.
Right.
3. Yeah. Because I was at that game at Fog Allen Fieldhouse.
The Salim game.
The Salim game where they unveiled Paul Pierce's jersey. Almost hit my brother in the head as he was in the last row. And then again, just look at the Big 12 right now. You got Arizona Baylor. You've got Arizona
Houston,
Arizona Cincy,
West Virginia,
Texas Christian right now is a rivalry game. It's a better basketball conference, top to bottom. And I know they lost Oklahoma, who's good, and they lost Texas, who's disappointing in basketball right now. But then again, would that bolster Utah basketball? Might.
Right.
I think the thing other people overlook might help Arizona football. That is a wide open league right now. I mean, who's the big dog in that league right now? Oklahoma State?
Baylor.
TCU just went under a coaching change. Patterson's gone. So while Arizona is rebuilding, I think we all saw the specter of USC and wondered, right now you could be in a Western division, and if Baylor or Texas Tech is the big dog, or Oklahoma, you have to have the coaching, you have to have the recruiting, but it might be wide open. Now, you could also be in a Western Conference with Utah, Oregon, and Washington and be in trouble. But there is an opportunity there for Arizona in football. And I think the other thing to look at is there's an opportunity for Arizona softball, women's basketball, and baseball to get a real shine.
Right.
Again, they lost Oklahoma and Texas in those sports. And they have other really good teams. As we have seen, Texas Tech baseball is really good right now. Baylor has been pretty good in a variety of sports. Oklahoma State in the bat sports. But, Arizona can, and again, I think the digital rights is where Arizona is really going to make their play. They can say, we have a rabid fan base for softball that most teams out west don't have.
All right, our guy Brad Malone, Bear Down Bias, said, my worry is U of A did not put emphasis on football for decades, and I hope it does not leave Tucson out in the cold. Arizona basketball will be fine. Football is a different story. I think the move to the Big 12 is actually good for Arizona football for a variety of reasons. First, like you said, it's not like you're going into this murderer's row where you're having to play Alabama, Georgia, Texas A&M week in, week out. Sure, there are some really good teams in there. Your Baylor's, like, Oklahoma State's generally good if you bring in Utah. But there's a lot of games in there that you can win, especially if you continue to bring in talent. Kansas State is a winnable game. Kansas is a winnable game. I can keep going on and on down the list. There's nobody outside of maybe one or two teams that you're like, man, they don't have any chance right here, Brad.
What you have to look at is, I think people are forgetting that it's not the results these leagues care about.
Right.
It is, what can this football product bring our league?
Right.
And again, I've seen conflicting reports, but I know Dane Miller with one of the Pac-12 sites did a report on the 2018-2019 pre-COVID revenues.
Mm-hmm.
And Arizona was 7th or 8th. I think they were 8th in the Pac-12.
Right.
But they were closer to being 3rd than they were to being 9th. And they were something like $45 million in revenues and $20 million in profit. And they were ahead of ASU. They were ahead of UCLA. They were ahead of someone else. And that's what you have to say. Is Arizona willing to further commit to football and maybe commit a little bit more? And I think if you're Arizona, you're like, sure, we'll add 5 or 7 million to the budget if it means getting more media rights and getting into your league. Because if Arizona wins, they're going to start drawing 45, 50,000 again.
Right.
They're going to start watching on TV again. So that is more important than the fact that Arizona has only won 1 game or 2 games, or because if they get good, people will start to watch. Frankly, if Oregon State starts getting good again at football, I don't know if people are going to watch.
Right.
Same thing with Washington State. That's why those 2 teams are at the biggest risk of getting left out of all of this. There's a very real chance that those are Mountain West teams. The one that does baffle me a little is Cal, seems to be on the outside looking in. But yeah, so I think, Arizona resonates more. And again, if it means bringing in the Phoenix market and Arizona's willing to invest a little more in football, and that's easy enough to commit to, then I think Arizona's going to be just fine.
Let me ask you this. We talk about Arizona a lot. I like making fun of ASU. Will ASU ever be nationally relevant in basketball or football the way that Arizona is in basketball?
I don't think so. And I'll tell you one big problem they have. With the exception of USC football and Miami football. What big city? UCLA basketball. It's not the big city markets that become national powers.
Right.
Now, adjacent to a big, Ann Arbor, Michigan's 45 minutes from downtown Detroit or whatever.
Right.
But I just don't think you have, frankly, the passion with the boosters. Because we keep hearing that. ASU's a sleeping giant. Well, why? Because they're in Phoenix. Phoenix is cool. Tempe is cool. Well, then why isn't UCLA football better?
Right.
Why isn't, a lot of these big cities? All your national powers are in small. Now, they're using Tuscaloosa, Alabama, Austin, Texas, Norman, Oklahoma, Durham, North Carolina. Is Durham close to Charlotte? Yeah, but at the rise of that, Charlotte was like the 70th media market. They're bigger now because of the tech boom. Washington football from time to time, but I don't know. I would think, could the right coach go in there and make them a powerhouse? Absolutely. But that's true with 85% of the program. So until someone does it, I'm going to say no.
Right. I would agree with you on there. Let's see here. If the move to the Big 12 happens, 2 basketball matchup each year with Kansas and Baylor has me salivating. It's funny. I was talking with our guy, and I don't think I'm speaking out of turn. There's a lot of people like Matt Muehlbach who are athletes here at the U of A or, grew up, who are really upset about the Pac-12 dissolving right here. And, I get it because, they're Letterman. This is what they did. But I also look at it and just say to myself, doesn't it feel almost kind of like it's time? I mean, the Pac-12 has essentially been a joke. I mean, not a joke, but it's been nationally looked at as a distant 4th or 5th now for quite a while. And on top of that, we can't let a lot of these presidents off the hook right here. I mean, Larry Scott got extensions. Larry Scott got raises from a lot of the and was rubber stamped by a lot of these presidents, which shows me a lack of understanding that Larry Scott was doing a very bad job there. And I think a lot of this was just academics that were saying to themselves, yeah, who cares? You rubber stamp. Let's just keep it the way it is.
I've seen something, and I find it very interesting, where people have mentioned that U of A, and I think to a lesser extent Utah, fit the culture of the Big 12 better.
Right.
So I'll ask you this, Mike, and this is to be the biggest loss of the Pac-12, is the Pac-12 basketball tournament in Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
What two fan bases showed up and showed out regardless of the strength of the team?
Arizona, Utah.
Now, some of that was proximity to Salt Lake City.
For sure.
And proximity to Tucson. But that, to me, is one of the problems with the Pac-12 is it doesn't have rabid fan bases. There are exceptions. I think Washington football still brings in 80,000 even when they suck.
Right.
But, USC, they might have 60,000, 100,000 seat stadium if they're not winning, whereas Alabama 6-win Alabama still sells out generationally.
Right.
And now Arizona's not there, but Arizona men's basketball especially, lesser extent the non-revenue sports, is a big-time fan base that rivals pretty much anyone with maybe the exception of Kentucky.
Right.
And Kentucky's just different. Kansas is really good too, but I've been to tournament games when Arizona and Kansas have both been there, and it's pretty close.
Right.
Because all those guys our age and maybe even more your age who grew up.
Don't lump me in with you, William.
Who grew up watching Carolina and Kansas and Duke and said, I want to be them, are now putting their money where their mouth is. So I think culturally, Arizona might fit in a little bit better with the Big 12, with those fan bases and with those schools who really care about athletics. And say what you want about President Robbins, good or bad, he cares about athletics.
Right.
Which, we saw with some presidents and some we haven't.
Right.
And you're right. Cal doesn't care about athletics, and that's one reason a team in the Bay Area is going to get left out.
Right.
And Stanford might not care enough. Does ASU care? I think they do. But they're running it oddly. Washington cares, Oregon cares. But at the end of the day, does Wazoo care? I don't know. But right. Arizona right now cares. And Robbins, again, also, I'm going to this. Robbins ties to Texas in the Big 12. That's going to help as well sell Arizona here. So, again, I know we're talking like it's a done deal. I don't think it's a done deal, but I think it's the most logical place for Arizona and these other four schools to be when the smoke clears from all this.
I want to ask you something about what happened when I was growing up with the Pac-10 and where we are now. But first, real quick, DraftKings Sportsbook app, code word PHNX. All right, you might be thinking to yourself, Mike, what do you think? What's your DraftKings pick of the week? My DraftKings pick of the week in UFC, and I'm getting this from Kobe Thiel, who messaged me saying Rafael Fiziev, lightweight in the main event. Take it for what it's worth. That's my pick of the week right there. 21 and up. Arizona only. If you got a gambling problem, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP. They'll get you taken care of. Again, I know nothing about UFC, but Kobe does know about it, so throw that one in there. William, do you know anything about UFC?
Very little. I think the strategy used to be bet on the Brazilian, and I don't think that's true anymore. Right.
I think that's probably the case as well. So again, check it out. DraftKings Sportsbook app, code word PHNX. All right. I was thinking about this. What happened to the Pac-12? Because when I was, and you see it, Steve Ramirez and a couple other people have made this point. When I was growing up in the mid-90s, Pac-12 basketball, granted, it wasn't the ACC, the Big East is probably a better example, but you had two top 5 to 7 programs in Arizona and UCLA, which was always a big deal when they got together. It was at the height of the Jim Herrick era, Lute Olson, Mike Montgomery always kind of had that top 10 to 12, something like that. And then there would always be kind of a fourth team, whether that was an Oregon team that got hot or an ASU, heck, and even an ASU team for a couple years there that made a Sweet 16, I believe. And in football, you had Washington was a national power for the early part of the 90s. USC was obviously in the Rose Bowl with John Robinson. Arizona had 2 top 10 finishes. ASU had a top 5 finish. What happened from the mid 90s to where we are now approaching the mid 2020s where that just went away?
Well, I would say this. I would say with Pac-12 football, you had a stretch, and I want to say from about 96 to early 2000s, you could argue if there was a 4-team tournament, the Pac-12 could have won 4 or 5 championships. Right. Those USC teams, the Oregon State team with the 2 receivers, the Erickson Oregon State team, the Joey Harrington Oregon team, the Arizona 98 team.
It was deep.
It was deep. I think a few things happened. One, the advent of streaming and things like that. I can go play for Texas, and I'm Bijan. My mom can see every game.
Right.
I can go to Alabama. My mom can see every game. I can FaceTime mom at home. I don't have to just call. I don't have to use my calling card to find a phone, payphone in the dorm.
Right.
2, bad hires.
Right.
UCLA hired Steve Alford and kept with him for too long. Stanford made bad hires. USC football, have they still replaced Pete Carroll?
Right.
UCLA football.
Right.
Even Washington football, they haven't been able to fire. You can, and then you combine that with Arizona falling on some hard times with the infractions under Miller, who again, I know people are love to jump on Miller, but if that doesn't happen, Arizona's probably been in the Final Four by now. So you throw bad hires with talent leaving the thing with some bad TV with the Pac-12 network.
Right.
It was a failure, and it all adds up. And teams now come in and poach the best players.
Right. Okay, Brad, before we sign off here, and again, everybody, really thank you guys for all hopping in here. I wanted to ask, Kenny Abbey has a special question for you. Sorry to go off, but if you ask Brad about how he sees Dallin Terry fitting in with the Chicago Bulls, what do you think about that?
I think the beauty of Dallin Terry is he fits in with most teams.
Right.
And again, right now, my guess is they'll bring him along slowly. I guess I didn't check the stats, but I know he played pretty well in one of their first summer games or summer practices. I think as a 3-and-D guy in the modern NBA, he will be fine. He's a guy who, again, do you need him to start at the 3? Great, he can do it. Do you need him to come off the bench and give you minutes at the 1, 2, and 3? Great, he can do it. The way the team is constructed today, they might not be constructed tomorrow. But he's a guy who, at least as this version of the NBA exists, he has a place because he is such a versatile player. When you look at a Christian Koloko needed to go to the absolute right system.
Right.
Even with DeAndre Ayton, you look at the trouble he's having, maybe find home because he has to go to the right system. Guys like Terry and Mathurin can pretty much play on almost any team in the NBA as long as we're doing the outside in game.
Right. Okay, real quick before we sign off here, then Alfred Chavez fantastic person, by the way. Any chance the Big 12 plays basketball football championships in Vegas? I would love to see that happen, but one thing that I would like to see is the Pac-12 refs stay in the Pac-12, though. They don't get to come over to the Big 12 as well. They should stay over there, William.
The Big 12 is a really well-officiated conference because it's got that balance of aggressive, hard play that you see from the Midwest and the East Coast, and then wide open West. I think they could. I think you could see a situation where it rotates. I know it's been in Kansas City a lot. I know it's been, I think, in Dallas a lot, but I could see Vegas. It's a transportation hub. If suddenly you have 5 or 6 or 7 teams, because people forget BYU's coming in the conference as well.
Right.
So if you have 5 schools within driving distance, that might make it very attractive because Kansas is coming. Oklahoma State is coming. Just like I think Arizona is probably going to come to those other locations, just maybe not 10,000 Arizona fans. It may only be 4,000. But I could see it being in the rotation every few years and frankly, let's also not forget that I think Vegas aggressively goes after these tournaments. That's why you have some years you'll have 5 there simultaneously, and they have the venues and when you look at the new arenas being built in every everyone's trying to fill their arenas. So yeah, I think there's a realistic possibility it could at least be in the rotation like every 4 or 5 years, assuming a full westward expansion of those 4 teams.
He's Brad Allis. I'm Mike Luke. Everybody, again, really apologize. Brad, thanks for hanging in there, buddy. It means a ton.
Nah, just postponed my lunch. I do this on my lunch break. Just postponed it, kept working.
Okay. Brad, we'll talk to you next Tuesday. Thanks again, buddy.
Sounds good.
All right, we'll talk to all of you soon. You've been listening to the AZ Wildcats podcast.